It's the art of bombing.
Welcome to the Art of Bombing presents How to Produce Your Own Show Part 2. In the first part, we covered finding a venue, kind of getting equipment set up, and just basically the ins and outs of just kind of getting your show. And in this part, we're going to talk more about building your lineup and securing talent and getting ready to that next step before you start promoting your show. So thank you for joining us on this stream. Yeah, it's a little different, but we're gonna, if you have questions, you're gonna notice we did do this a little bit different last time. It was more like a Zoom meeting. This time we're just streaming it. We do have an audience. We appreciate you people that are watching. If you have questions, just throw them in the chat and we'll get to them. We'll try to get to them as we go, but we'll probably finish like a section and then take care of the questions. But if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll address them when we can. And without further ado, let's get into this presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Josh Shirley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dan Bublitz Jr., son of Dan Bublitz.
We're so formal on this podcast
now. Lately, we have been. It's just
we have titles.
Yes, indeed, sir. Nobility, indeed. Yeah, Tanya will like that one. Just she's stuck over in merry old England or something. So this is an international crowd here, guys. We're doing How to Produce Your Own Show Part 2. Part 1, as Dan said, was all about the getting set up right, getting yourself to set up for success. This is going to deal more with the actual show itself, what people are actually going to watch happen on stage, and how to make that into a masterpiece. Here we go. There's 3 parts. For those of you listening later, we'll do our best to just keep you in line in terms of where we are in the story here. But we're starting off with just a quick look ahead here, kind of 3 quick bullet points for the structure of this evening here. Building a great lineup is first. Then we'll cover some pro tips for the show itself. And as always in this series, we will tell you how to avoid pitfalls and traps. Are you ready, Dan?
Yes, I think I'm ready. I'm ready to get into this, especially, avoiding traps. I feel like I'm pretty nimble. I'm pretty quick. I'm ready to avoid traps.
That's right. You're like that guy at Pitfall when you had to jump across like all 3 of those alligators. You remember that part?
Stop aging us.
Everybody's like, what are you talking about, dude? Yeah. All right. We're 8-bit people, I guess.
That's right. My tattoos prove it.
That's right. Yeah. So why don't you just put a tattoo on with your age on it? That's what you need to do.
Before you get too far into this, yeah, that's right, Stephen. You can only see 2 people because this is set up as a stream versus a meeting where everybody else is in here. I kind of mentioned that a little while ago, but just so you guys are aware, yeah, you're not going to be able to see other people. They're here watching. You can chat with them in the chat group, though.
That's right. Stephen is set straight. All right. Building a lineup. Here we go. So first off, who to approach. So obviously, it goes beyond the obvious, which, hey, let's get talented and funny people up there who know what they're doing to have a good show. So we're going to take it a bit past the obvious here. My thought on this point, Dan, was to get people on your show, especially if you're trying to contribute something to your scene, if you want to leverage your show to get on other shows. My thought was get people who run shows on your show. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a good approach, especially to help you get booked. However, I think I think we kind of missed a step here. Before you even can start building a lineup, you have to decide what kind of show you're doing. And I don't think we covered the specifics of that in the first episode. And what I mean by that is you have to decide, are you going to do a showcase show where you have, 5 to 6 comics on the show, doing a traditional show where you do a host feature headliner, maybe a guest spot. Once you got to kind of decide that first, and then once you make that decision, that will help with who you approach. But yeah, getting other people who book shows is a good way to help you get on other shows.
That's right. We are going to cover traditional and showcase. We're gonna save that nugget for finding the right number of comics. But Dan is right. You do have to decide that. That's an important thing to know before you start approaching comics as well. But getting people who are on shows, and then once you know the format of your show, it's good to know how many comics to go get and what kind.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's important because you need to know, before you approach people, you need to know what kind of time they fill, because, a headliner, if you depending on your scene, your headliner might be able to do 45 minutes. So even if you're doing a showcase show, that they're going to be able to do a 10 to 15 minute spot. If you have somebody else that's just doing open mics, they might not be able to do that 15-minute spot. But if you have a guest spot, they might be able to fill that. So you really got to determine how much time, who's doing what, so you know who to approach, because you don't want to approach people. You're just like, I'm just gonna put it all out there.
Well, I'm actually thinking that, Dan, because I think you're bringing up a good point here. We ought to talk more about traditional and showcase first, and then we can kind of back into headlining out. So some of you guys who are watching this saw me build out some of the slides, because I think all of it's relevant to what we're talking about right now.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And like I said, the basic difference between a showcase show and a traditional show is that a showcase show is going to have 4 or 5 comics, and they'll all do similar times. Or you might have a couple comics do 7 minutes, a couple do 12, and a couple maybe do 15, or maybe one does 15 to 20 as the headliner. But it's going to be 5+ comics, where your traditional show typically it'll be an MC feature headliner. Sometimes you'll throw in a guest spot on there, and you'll have up to 4 comics. Sometimes a traditional show is just a feature headliner too, depending on what your situation is.
That's right. So when we think about a traditional show, Dan and I were together on what we would consider to be a traditional show. So Dan was the headliner. Before him, we had a feature and we had an MC, and that was the basic format. Inside of that format, you typically sprinkle a guest spot. Some comics, some shows, you can have more than one guest spot that happens right there. But in a traditional format, it's MC, feature, and headliner, with the headliner doing most of the time in that format.
Yeah. Typically in that format, your host or your MC will do 10 to 15 minutes. Feature will do a half hour. Headliner will do 45 to an hour.
That's right. So if you're doing a show for the first time, there's a lot of ways you can think about this, but it might be smart to think about doing a showcase show, because you'll have more comics who can put more word out and bring more people. That's typically the safer way to do it. It's not exactly the way to make the most money for the comics that are involved. If you're looking to, if your goal is to make money to support the show and support the comics who are on it. If you're trying to attract a headliner to who travels regionally or nationally to your location, you're going to want to pay well. And typically a traditional setup is the best way to support that idea. But a showcase can be really good if you're getting out and you're just setting a few things up to begin with. Give everybody 10 minutes, grab 7 comics and an MC, and you're pretty much ready to roll.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that too, especially depending on the night of the week, if we talked about that in the part 1 about choosing the right night and if going on an off night. If you get a weekday show, because weekday shows can be harder to get people to come out to, because people have jobs, things like that. Having a showcase show on a weekday makes more sense, because again, you have those extra comics helping to promote the show. Versus, and it'll be a lot harder anyway to attract a touring headliner to come on a weekday, unless you're in a position where you're in a city where you can route through, as an example, because I know that Darren's watching, he lives up in Wyoming, in his situation, if somebody was coming from Denver and working their way up to like Montana to one of the clubs up there, you know, he might be able to get them between that kind of thing. And, you know, so that's kind of what we're saying there with the routing.
That's right. So I also have up here the importance of a strong headlining act. Whether you're doing a traditional or a showcase show, you want to have the comic that you think is going to do the best job for the audience at the end, because that's going to give you a way to ensure that the show ends on a high note, so that the audience also knows when the show is over, and it sends everybody out on just with a bigger feeling. It makes a bigger impact, and you want to try and aim or arc the trajectory of the show to get funnier as the night progresses for the most part.
Yep, you want that energy to just keep building and building and building until it finally pops.
Yeah, like a balloon, like a comedy balloon. or comedy bomb. I mean, this is the art of bombing. I also,
well, we'd rather not have the energy to lead to a bomb. I mean,
that's right. But it explodes like a balloon does.
The idea is to avoid them.
That's right. That's right. We also got Zit as a
that's another
suggestion from the audience. Thanks, guys.
There you go. You can let it build and build and build until it pops like a Zit. There we go.
And then you're 14 years old.
Just make sure you tape that, because apparently Zit popping videos are popular on the internet.
Oh my God. That's what they're doing now, huh?
Oh,
okay. So putting the comics in order, I have this on here as well. So one of the things that happens a lot is that the comics are in an arbitrary order. We'll cover this again when we get to the traps section, but it's important to have the comics, for the most part, progress towards the end. And it's also a really good idea to have your first comic really grab everybody's attention, whether that's the MC or the comic that's going to go first for the night. I like to have a strong act open the show so that people know they're in for a good night. All right. So, additional pro tips to cover. Now, this first tip that we're going to give you guys, I think, is incredibly valuable. And it's a trick that you can use if you're ever in doubt about getting a crowd, or if you want to ensure that this show on this night is packed. One of the many gifts that Dan and I will give you this evening is this idea of using a videographer. Now, you can't do this every show. It's not going to work if you do it every time. But
unless you have the budget for it.
That's right.
If you can pay somebody to be there every time, it'll probably work every time, as long as you got different comics.
Right. Yeah, it might be hard to sustain.
Yeah.
But using a videographer is a really good way to put an exclamation point on bringing people out to a show and getting the best performance from the comics. Because essentially what you're saying is, hey guys, we're going to come out, you're going to do a show, and this is going to be videotaped. I just said videotape, which dates me, but I don't care. That's what we've been doing.
Well, we already talked about, I would say that's a pitfall. So,
videographer, they know, hey, look, somebody's coming out here and they're going to be taping this show. I got to get a crowd out to support it, because I want it to be great so that I can use it. And so using a videographer is going to put extra emphasis for the other comedians to bring people out. So yeah, another pro tip that we brought along was something that we don't talk about a ton, which is the guest spot. So a guest spot, just to sort of reset the table on guest spot, means I'm going to have a comic that's going to come in that weren't necessarily expected, or they're out of the format. So if I have a traditional show, I have MC, feature, headliner, and I got somebody, hey, I want you to come on too. Having somebody in a guest spot, typically, this is not always the case. A lot of times you see very experienced comedians popping on shows for guest spots. I like to use guest spots for comics most of the time. And I didn't on the last show that I did, but for the most part, I like to have comics who are newer to comedy they're still funny. They still have a good 5, 7, 10 minutes that they can do, but they aren't necessarily that experienced in the world of comedy. What I'd like to do to leverage the guest spot is to offer somebody time for help in producing the show. So on the last episode, we talked about how when you're setting yourself up for success at the venue, you need a way to take tickets, you need a way to take names, you need a way to check people in. You got to work with the venue to get things sorted because you're busy running around doing all the producing. And if you're putting yourself on the show, that's another thing you've got to manage. So having somebody else there, an extra pair of hands to help you count money at the end of the night, help you get some of these things, these admin things done, can be given to somebody in exchange for doing time on your show, especially if you have a show that they know a lot of people are going to come to. And you get approached. If you have a good show that you do a lot, comics will approach you about being on it. And a good way to get people on it is to exchange guest spot time for some help with the show. I've done that a lot of times. And I have a lot of comics in town now who are headlining and doing great stuff who 5 years ago were coming into the show to do guest spots, and they were helping me wrangle and do crowd control at the top of the show.
Yep. I would say with that too, yeah, you can leverage that guest spot. But if you don't, just remember, if you do book, unless you book it in advance, some people will just leave room open for a guest spot and they won't necessarily book it till like maybe a day or two before the show. And if you do that, it's okay to do that, but just remember, you can't put a lot of pressure on them to bring people and promote the show because it's kind of a last minute. You got to kind of plan ahead on that. You can't just, oh, well, tickets aren't selling, I should book somebody real quick that hopefully they'll help sell tickets.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, it seems like a good plan, but it's a lot of pressure you're putting on that person, and they're probably not going to come through for you. So, as a producer, it's at the end of the day, it's your job to make sure there's people in the audience.
That's right. Dan's right. You have to think about that ahead of time. It's never a solve for an audience deficiency is never getting another comic to the show.
Yeah.
Now, maybe they'll sit and watch it and also laugh. That, I guess, plugs the gap in a sense. But
well, yeah, but typically that's not what happens. So we as comics know that's usually not how it goes.
That is not how it goes. So finally,
if they're in a corner on their phone, probably.
Yeah. When am I going up? So we also just want to remind you guys that the reason you're doing a show is that there's some grand design in it for you, right? You want to get on other shows. You want to offer something to your scene, give to get. You want to work on your stuff. Just think about what that show means for you. So if that means I want to be a good producer and do amazing shows, that's a good goal. If the goal is I want to have a funny 10 minutes, then give yourself 10 minutes. So it's your show. So you get to decide where you go in the lineup. You can always give the guest spot to yourself and go on right before the headliner. This is a little unorthodox, but I've done this as well, where I've announced a lot of people come to my shows and they know who I am and they want to see me perform, but I'm not necessarily going to perform that night because I'm doing lots of different material, or I'm working on producing the show, and that's my focus. But I'll come out at the end of the show after the entire thing's over and do 20 new minutes, and I'll announce at the end of the show that the show's over and the paying crowd who wants to leave can go, and anybody sticking around will just move to the front and watch me work on some stuff. And that I've done that a few times, and that was just something that helped me. But people seem to get a little bit out of it as well.
Wow, doing a bonus show. You're like, I'm not even on that show, but I'm going to do an encore.
Yeah. It's like those DVD extras,
I do want to just real quick with this. Yes, it is your show, and you're the idea is to make stage time for yourself. But while it is your show, you got to make sure there's a fine line. When I see this a lot, where comics, it's my show, I do what I want. And then they don't treat their comics as good because they make the show about them. While it is your show, it's not about you. It's about whoever you book to be the headliner. It's about whoever you book to be the feature, so on and so forth. That's who you need to make sure feels special doing your show and make sure it's good for them. Because you want to get that stage time and everything. But if you start where you, for example, if you have a show and you host it and then you do 5 minutes between every comic, and then the show just keeps getting dragged out, and sometimes you're doing new material, so the show, the energy is getting brought down and you're losing the crowd. All these are variables that can happen. I've seen it happen. Then by the time the headliner gets up there, the audience is exhausted and it turns out not to be a great show for them. Now they're going to go tell every other comic. They'll be like, yeah, I got paid, but the show is, the host just did this. They did 10 minutes between every comic and went on and on and on. I didn't think I was ever going to get up there. Then they did 20 minutes after the show was over. And
yeah.
But what Josh said though, I'm trying to rib him a little bit, but it's not the same thing, because Josh is saying the show is over, and then technically he's doing a separate show. And that's the important thing there that I want to point out and highlight with what Josh is doing. Because I've seen that where the comic will go, all right, give it up for your headliner closes the show, and then they go up there and do another 15 minutes after the headliner was done. And that's
and that's not good for the audience either, because they're like, when is this gonna end? Like, there's no communication about the end of the show. Before I really knew what I was doing, I did something like that where I had like 80 comics on the show. Everybody did 46 minutes. I did 5 minutes that were all bad in between each. It just dragged on and on.
Yeah.
And on. So
yeah, because you want to remember, you got that time. There's that sweet spot, that 75 to 90 minutes, or even up to 100 minutes. But you want to keep that time in mind.
That's right. Yeah, comedy essentially asks a lot of the audience. You have, and this bears repeating, but you want to keep it at a time where you don't wear the audience out too much.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some traps.
Ooh.
Okay. So
those pitfalls are here.
That's right. That's right. The pit, the 3 alligators that we're gonna jump over across. You gotta swing on the. I don't know. I don't remember that game.
I don't know. If you're talented enough, you just run across their noses. Their snouts.
That's right. But while their mouths are closed. There's a timing to it. So just to wrap up, guys, this has been a little shorter, tighter episode.
Frogger.
We're covering a little less material this time, but one of the things that I've seen that really wrecks a show is making a newer comic the MC, or putting newer comics at the beginning of the show. So there seems to be, and there is kind of in professional comedy sort of rite of passage that comics have to go through, where I'm an MC for a while, and then I'm a feature for a while, and then I'm a headliner for a while. And that is true at the professional level in clubs. It is not necessarily true at the amateur level whenever you're putting on a show in an alt room, bar, coffee shop type scenario. You can make it a professional experience for everyone, and that is what Dan and I are trying to teach you to do. But it is a bad move to take somebody who's brand new to comedy, and just because they're the newest person, making them be the MC. The MC is a hard job. They jump on the grenade at the beginning of the show. They're not going to get the laughs that the other comics are getting usually. But that doesn't mean that you take the person who's been doing it for 6 months and make them the MC, because then the MC essentially owns the show. I prefer to take really experienced comics and make them the MC of the show. Many times I approach them about it and they're like, you want me to what? And I'm like, dude, calm down. This is going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great points about that with the newer comic and stuff too. And the thing is, with MCing, being an MC, it is a job. That's what it is. And that the MC's job is to bring up the other comics and make them feel like that they're the stars of the show. I mean, really, the MC has 2 jobs: warming up the audience. And by warming them up doesn't mean the MC should be crushing. That just means you're getting the audience ready for comedy. You're going out there and basically saying, all right, you've been hanging out with your friends right now, waiting for the show to start. You've been chit-chatting. You've had a few drinks. You've been eating, doing whatever. The show's starting. Now it's time for you to focus all your energy and attention up here at us. And then once you do that, as the MC, that part of the job, You warm them up with some jokes. They get, okay, this is what's going to happen now. We're going to listen to people talk. They're there. Then you start bringing up the other comics and make them feel like they're the stars of the show, because essentially they are. And depending on where your show is, something else to keep in mind with the MC represents you, whoever's producing the show, and whatever venue it is. So, for instance, if you get to produce a show at your local comedy club, whoever you have emceeing that show is now a representation of your production company and that club. They're essentially acting as an employee. And if they do something that is embarrassing, that would look bad on you and the club, that's on you guys. That's why it's important. That's why you can't just have any old person be the MC. It's an important job, and it's a very important position of the show. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. It is a job.
It's a hard one too, because in comedy, I really feel like it's an art form that's best. Like, everybody has different styles. Some comics are more confrontational than other comics, but for the most part, I find that a good comedy set is best performed by pulling people in with the material and the performance, not necessarily pushing it out or projecting it onto a crowd. The MC kind of has to do both of those things. They have to push the show out to get your attention. They have to pull you back in and get you interested and start the rhythm that Dan's talking about so that the show works. If you're standing up there and you're emceeing and crowd working and pushing the whole time, you do too much of that, it's not really going to set the show off right. So having both of those skills has to also be managed with the acumen to say, okay, I also have to remember and do correctly an introduction of a comic correctly. They also have to make housekeeping announcements, like the kitchen's closing at 8:30, or we are closing the day, whatever is going on. You're just balanced, or sign
Kitchen's
up for the
closing,
email.
Doing a drink blue light special on well whiskey.
That's right. You have to do all of that stuff and hold the audience's attention. And so it's not an easy job. It's definitely meant for somebody that knows what they're doing. So keep that in mind whenever you're putting your lineup for your show together. Same goes for the first comic on stage. This is just a preference thing, and I'm putting this up here because I've seen it work for me. But I really prefer to put the best comic last and the second to best comic first, really, in any situation, so that the show does need an overall arc to, funnier, hilarious, over. Like, we need to feel that, but at the same time, starting off a little too slow might make it so that the audience isn't pulled in.
Yeah. And I was just looking to see, I thought I did an episode on being an MC, because I have taught a workshop on it, but it doesn't look like. I was looking back at the history, and I haven't done it between bombs on being a good MC. I thought I had, but with that being said, look for that in the future. That's going to be something that we're going to do. We'll do another, it'll be a whole different one, but it'll be how to be a good MC. So that'll be an upcoming bonus between bombs coming up.
Excellent. Well, guys, I think it's a good time for questions. We have gone through the material for the show. And anything else to add, Dan?
Well, I do. I want to just circle back real quick. When thinking about building your lineup, just again, I would just want to, kind of emphasize some stuff there. You got to think about the comics that are right for the position. Like we've talked about, you want to have somebody that's going to be that's a strong comic and good in the sense that, they'll be able to be a good MC. Maybe having another person that's more experienced do the next spot, then a comic that's maybe newer smashed in there, and then back, because you also want to think about the flow when building your lineup, in the sense that you want to be able to, if somebody struggles, the next person's going to be able to win the crowd back. So when you're giving out guest spots or even doing showcase type shows, there's a chance that you're going to have one comic the audience just doesn't like. I mean, that's what this is. This is the art of bombing. We know it happens. Now, the next comic needs to be able to win that crowd back. and not necessarily struggle. And then also, then you start losing that energy, instead of them winning the audience, everybody keeps losing it. It gets worse and worse for every comic. But just keep that in mind when building your lineup. You want to have, if you think somebody's not as strong, and be honest and subjective with yourself and building your lineup and the abilities of the comics that you booked, because not everybody's a crusher. That doesn't mean they're not a good comic. That just means they're not going to be as strong as a particular person, and there's kind of a saying in comedy, ride the wave. When somebody does really good, instead of going up there and, basically making fun of them or doing whatever, just go up and keep riding that wave. That's what I'm getting at with this, is if you got a comic that's crushing, hopefully your next comic will be able to ride that wave and keep it up. But in this off chance they're new and you don't know that they'll be able to follow a particular comic, that's fine. They can still do it, but just make sure you have somebody strong coming in after them.
That's right. And I just want to stay on that topic, to ride that wave for a second. I would also say that what I typically find to be more fun is to have a diverse show where it's not all the same kind of comic each time. It's not a bunch of white guys or whatever. Like, really put some thought into having some different voices, some different looks. Now you might be going for a particular theme. It might be, all female comics night. In that case, you have a specific thing you're trying to do.
Yeah, but even within that, you can still have diversity. You know what I mean? Like, within that, you can still have different voices. Not all female comics are the same. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I yes.
Yeah. So just, I know you know that that means. I'm just want to emphasize that to the people listening, that you can still.
Josh, let's have an intervention here. Look,
it's like, I don't know what you're booking over there, Josh, but we need to talk, buddy.
Nice.
Oh, but anyway, yeah, right. Darren, we know that in Wyoming it's only white guys. We've seen some of those flyers that come out of Wyoming for comedy shows. It was funny. I actually did see one. I don't remember what the show was, but there's a Facebook group called Bad Comedy Flyers, and there was one that was from a show in Wyoming that made it into the group.
Not good.
Although, it's not in that sense, but it kind of is, because it's almost like a rite of passage. If you haven't been on a bad comedy flyer, you might not be doing comedy.
So, guys, any questions from the crowd?
Yeah, this is a good time. If you got any questions about some of the stuff we covered, throw them in there real quick. And then if not, we're going to wrap this episode up. And while we're waiting for some questions, just do some maintenance, I guess you could say, some housekeeping with some announcements. The next episode for this part 3 of the How to Produce Your Own Comedy Show will be October 6th. Keep that in mind. That's 2 weeks from tonight. Same time. It'll probably be the same format, but that'll be 2 weeks from tonight. So it's not next Tuesday. It's 2 weeks from tonight, October 6th for part 3. If you're not in on Patreon, highly recommend it. We have a couple spots left on the Elite group, which is only $3.50 a month. We put out bonus content on there. We put on, I'm sorry. So the 4th, did I read the wrong date?
Yeah. Darren's right. It's the.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thanks, Darren. Yes, the 4th, 2 weeks from tonight. Appreciate it. Appreciate that. So.
All right.
And we do have some questions here, but real quick. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to finish that plug. If you're not part of Patreon, we'd love to have you. Some of the assets there will be some assets from this series that will only be available to the people who are subscribing on Patreon. But so if you want to join, we'd appreciate it. But again, no pressure. So first question, he said, if you are an MC, and this is from Kevin, if you are an MC and a comic doesn't do well, should you address it, elephant in the room, or win the crowd back and keep the energy positive? this is all strictly opinion based, I think, but in my opinion, I say ignore it and win the audience back. I mean, because for one, the comic probably already knows he did bad. You're right. The audience knows he did bad. Now you're just putting salt on the wound for, unless, it's a good friend. If it's somebody you could get away with a jab or something, that's fine. But otherwise, you're just basically crapping on a comic you booked that just had a bad set. It's better, I think, just to win that audience back.
Yeah.
What do you think, Josh?
Well, I think if jabbing the comic wins the audience back, then I think both you and that comic are going to be on board with doing it, as long as it doesn't do it in such a way that's detrimental to that comic. So you have to kind of judge the situation. But if there's a particular topic that the comic covered or whatever that you have a quip on that might bring the audience back, you can build on it. But to Dan's point, don't make it personal about the comedian.
Yeah. Well, and make it quick. If you do something, make it quick. You don't need to do a whole 5 minutes on how bad that comic was, and just keep roasting them. Say it, address it so it's out there, and then win the audience back and then move on.
Listen to our episode with Mo Alexander from a few months ago. Go back and find that one. He actually tells a story about how he bombed, and then the next comic did 15 minutes on how badly he bombed. But that's why it's a story, is it shouldn't happen very often.
Yeah, exactly. And he said he was in it. Steven says he was unable to watch part 1, could only hear on Spotify. Is that the only way to watch again? No. So part 1, I just didn't get time to do it. I've been touring a lot this month. But we will be doing the video. I'll be putting the video up on YouTube, hopefully early next week. I'm going to be out of town this weekend, but then things will be slowing down for me a little bit. So hopefully next week I'll be able to do the video for both part 1 and part 2 will be up on the YouTube. But again, it is on, you're right, it's on Spotify right now for the audio. The audio is on Spotify, but we will try to get the videos up.
All right, gang.
Cool.
Great questions.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions coming in? If not, while I'm thinking about it, I will put some links into the chat. That's for the Patreon. Real quick, with the I know a few of you were here at the last one, and several of you did join the Facebook group. Thank you for that. Did you guys? I posted the equipment thread that I said I would. Hopefully that was helpful for the people that were here. I don't know if anybody actually looked through it, but it is posted there. I posted it a couple days after the episode. Yes, it did. All right, good. That's what I wanted to make sure that people saw that was in there, and it was helping everybody out. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you guys for joining us on the Art of Bombing, Between Bombs, how to produce your own comedy show part 2. Again, part 3 will be October 4th. That's a Tuesday, 2 weeks tonight, not the 6th.
It's 2 days sooner than the 6th, guys.
Yeah, exactly. You're getting it sooner.
That's right. We moved it up just for you guys.
Yeah, yes, and because I'm a dummy. All right, thank you guys so much. Have a good rest of your night, and thanks for listening.
It's the art of bombing.